Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The morning of October 17th began like any other for Officer Marcus Caldwell. The autumn air carried that familiar bite of approaching winter, and the streets of Detroit's industrial district lay quiet under a pale gray sky. Marcus had been patrolling these same blocks for 32 years. In 3 months, he would retire. He had already started counting the days. At 58 years old, Marcus had seen enough to fill several lifetimes. He had witnessed the best of humanity, and the worst. He had saved lives and held the hands of those he could not save. But lately, a question haunted him during these early morning rounds. How many people had he driven past without truly seeing? How many souls had slipped through the cracks while he focused on the obvious calls? His radio crackled at exactly 7:43. A concerned citizen had reported something unusual near the alley behind Morrison Street. Nothing specific, just something that did not look right. Marcus turned his patrol car toward the location, expecting the usual. A stray animal, perhaps, or discarded furniture that someone mistook for something sinister. These calls rarely amounted to anything significant. The alley sat between 2 abandoned warehouses, remnants of Detroit's manufacturing past. Trash bags lined the walls in uneven piles, some torn open by animals searching for food. The smell of decay hung in the cold air. Marcus stepped out of his vehicle and approached slowly, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. At first he saw nothing unusual, just more garbage, more evidence of a neighborhood that had been forgotten by time and progress. Then he noticed movement, slight, almost imperceptible. One of the trash bags near the corner shifted. His hand moved instinctively toward his radio as he stepped closer. What he discovered made him freeze completely. It was not a trash bag. It was a child. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, sat curled against the brick wall. Her clothes were filthy and torn. Her hair was matted and tangled. Her skin was pale, far too pale, and her eyes held a distant, hollow look that Marcus had seen before in people who had given up hope entirely. But what shocked him most was her appearance. Her small frame seemed swollen in a way that did not match her obvious malnutrition. Her abdomen protruded unnaturally, creating a silhouette that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. He knelt down slowly, keeping his voice as gentle as possible. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name is Marcus. I am a police officer. I am here to help." "You?" The girl stared at him without speaking. Her lips were cracked and dry. She trembled, though whether from cold or fear, Marcus could not tell. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked softly. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke a single word that would echo in Marcus's mind for months to come. "Please." Marcus removed his jacket and wrapped it around her thin shoulders. She flinched at first but did not pull away. As he prepared to lift her, a thought struck him with sudden, terrible clarity. How long had she been here? How long had she been invisible to everyone who passed this alley? He carried her toward his patrol car, her weight shockingly light in his arms. Just before he reached the vehicle, something made him glance back at the abandoned warehouse across the street. A curtain moved in a third-floor window. Someone had been watching, and now whoever it was had disappeared back into the shadows. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind. This little girl had a story, and he was determined to uncover every chapter of it. How did this child end up alone in an alley? Who was watching from that window? And what explains her mysterious condition? The answers will unfold in ways no one could predict. The emergency room at Detroit General Hospital had seen countless urgent cases over the years. But when Officer Marcus Caldwell carried a small, trembling girl through the automatic doors that October morning, something shifted in the air. Nurses stopped mid-conversation. Doctors looked up from their charts. Even the constant hum of medical equipment seemed to pause for a brief moment. Marcus held the child close, her frail body wrapped in his patrol jacket. "I need help immediately," he announced. his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Found her alone in an alley off Morrison Street. She needs medical attention now. A team of nurses rushed forward with a stretcher. The girl clung to Marcus's shirt with surprising strength, her eyes wide with terror. She had not spoken another word since that single desperate plea in the alley. "It is okay, sweetheart," Marcus whispered as they gently placed her on the stretcher. "These people are going to take care of you. I will be right here." Dr. Nathan Webb, a veteran physician with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, took charge immediately. He conducted a preliminary examination while nurses checked vital signs and prepared for tests. Marcus watched from a respectful distance, unable to leave despite knowing his official duty had technically ended. The girl wore a thin bracelet on her wrist. Not a medical bracelet, or anything official. It was handmade, crafted from cheap string and small plastic beads. The letters spelled out a name, Emily. "Emily," Marcus said softly, testing the name. It suited her somehow. A gentle name for a child who seemed to have known very little gentleness in her short life. 20 minutes into the examination, a woman appeared at the emergency room entrance. She was in her early 70s, with silver hair pinned back neatly and sharp, observant eyes. She wore a volunteer badge that read Ruth Holloway and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades in medical settings. Ruth had been a nurse for 43 years before retiring. Now she volunteered 3 days a week, finding purpose in helping frightened patients navigate the overwhelming hospital environment. When she heard about the little girl brought in by police, something pulled her toward the examination room. "They need someone to sit with her," a younger nurse explained. "She is terrified, will not let anyone touch her without panicking." Ruth approached Emily's bedside slowly, the way one might approach a wounded bird. The child's eyes darted toward her, immediately filled with suspicion and fear. "Hello there," Ruth said softly, settling into a chair beside the bed. "My name is Ruth. I used to be a nurse here a long time ago. Now I just visit people who might need a friendly face." Emily stared at her without responding, but she did not flinch. Away either. Ruth noticed everything her trained eyes could catalog. The signs of prolonged neglect were unmistakable. Malnutrition had left Emily's cheeks hollow and her arms impossibly thin. Old wounds that had healed without proper treatment left faint scars on her hands and feet. Her teeth showed evidence of years without dental care. But it was the look in Emily's eyes that affected Ruth most deeply. It was the look of someone who had learned very early that the world was not a safe place. "You are safe here," Ruth said gently. "No one is going to hurt you." For a moment, something flickered in Emily's expression. A tiny spark of hope, quickly extinguished by doubt. Dr. Webb returned with initial test results, his face carefully neutral in that practiced way physicians develop over years of delivering difficult news. He gestured for Marcus and Ruth to join him in the hallway. "The abdominal swelling is not what we initially suspected," he said quietly, ensuring no one else could hear. "She is not pregnant, but there is a mass. A tumor, most likely. We need to run more comprehensive tests to determine the severity." Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. "A tumor? In a child that young?" Dr. Webb nodded grimly. "It appears to have been growing for quite some time, years possibly, without any medical intervention whatsoever." Ruth closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the information. In her decades of nursing, she had encountered countless cases of neglect. But this felt different somehow, more personal. "There is something else," Dr. Webb continued, lowering his voice further. "We ran her information through every database we have access to: birth records, social services, school enrollment, medical history." He paused, his expression troubled. "This child does not exist. Officially, there is no record of Emily anywhere in the system." The three of them stood in heavy silence as the implications settled over them. Somewhere in America, in the 21st century, a little girl had lived completely invisible. No birth. certificate. No medical records, no school enrollment, no proof that she had ever existed at all. Until today. A child with no records. A tumor that grew for years without treatment. And a mystery that runs deeper than anyone imagined. Who is Emily? And how did she become invisible? The hospital grew quiet as evenings settled over Detroit. Visiting hours ended, and most volunteers went home to their families and warm dinners. But Ruth Holloway remained in the chair beside Emily's bed, unable to bring herself to leave. She told herself it was professional duty. The child needed someone familiar nearby. The nursing staff was overwhelmed with other patients. These were reasonable explanations, logical justifications for staying past her scheduled hours. But deep down, Ruth knew the truth was far more complicated. Emily had fallen into a restless sleep, her small chest rising and falling unevenly beneath the hospital blanket. Even in unconsciousness, her face held tension. Her hands gripped the sheets tightly, as if preparing to defend herself against threats that might appear at any moment. Ruth watched her and felt memories stir that she had spent years trying to bury. She had a daughter once. Her name was Crystal, too, by some cruel coincidence of fate. Crystal Holloway had been a bright child, full of laughter and curiosity. But somewhere along the way, things went wrong. The teenage years brought rebellion, then experimentation, then addiction. Ruth had tried everything she knew to help her daughter. Counseling, treatment programs, tough love, gentle love. Nothing worked. Crystal disappeared 12 years ago. She left a note saying she needed to find herself, that she could not be the daughter Ruth wanted her to be. Ruth never saw her again. She did not know if Crystal was alive or dead, healthy or suffering. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture, a wound that never fully healed. Now, looking at this abandoned child named Emily, Ruth felt something shift inside her chest. It was as if the universe had presented her with a second chance she did not deserve but desperately needed. Emily stirred and opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, confusion clouded her expression. Then recognition settled in as she saw Ruth still sitting beside her. "You stayed," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Ruth smiled gently. "I told you I would. Be here. I keep my promises." Emily studied her with an intensity unusual for someone so young. "People always leave," she said matter-of-factly. "That is what people do." The words carried no self-pity, only the resigned acceptance of someone who had learned this lesson too many times. Ruth felt her heart crack along old fault lines. "Not everyone," Ruth replied softly. "Some people stay." Emily seemed to consider this information carefully, as if it were a new concept she had never encountered before. Over the next hour, as night deepened outside the hospital windows, Emily began to share fragments of her past. She spoke in disconnected pieces, like a puzzle scattered across the floor. Ruth listened without interrupting, knowing that trust was a fragile thing that could shatter with a single wrong word. There was a woman who yelled a lot, a room that was always dark, days without food, the sound of a door locking from the outside, a window too high to reach, silence so complete that Emily sometimes wondered if she had gone deaf. "Did anyone ever read you stories?" Ruth asked during a quiet moment. Emily shook her head slowly. "What is a story?" Ruth reached into her bag and pulled out a small book she always carried. It was a nature guide about birds, filled with colorful illustrations. She had brought it hoping to distract frightened patients. Now it served a different purpose entirely. "A story is when someone shares something wonderful with you," Ruth explained, opening the book to a page showing a small brown bird with bright eyes. "Like this. This is called a wren." Emily leaned closer, fascinated by the image. "Wren," she repeated. "Like my name?" "Exactly like your name," Ruth confirmed. "See how small it is? Wrens are one of the tiniest birds in North America. But do you know what makes them special?" Emily shook her head, her attention completely captured. "They have the loudest songs," Ruth said, smiling. "Much louder than birds twice their size. They are not afraid to let the world hear them, even though they are small. Something changed in Emily's expression, a spark of recognition perhaps, or the beginning of hope. "That is me," she asked quietly, pointing at the illustration. Ruth nodded. "That is you, sweetheart, small but mighty, and one day, the whole world will hear your song." Emily stared at the picture for a long moment. Then she did something that made Ruth's breath catch in her throat. She smiled. It was small and hesitant, like a flower trying to bloom in rocky soil. But it was real. Meanwhile, across the city, Officer Marcus Caldwell was not sleeping either. He sat in his patrol car outside the abandoned warehouse on Morrison Street, watching the dark windows and thinking about the curtain that had moved earlier that day. Someone knew about Emily. Someone had been watching. He called in a records request and waited for the response. When it came, the information made his stomach tighten. The building had once housed a group home for at-risk youth. It closed 5 years ago after an investigation revealed serious problems with how it was operated. The records were sealed, but Marcus knew people who could access sealed files. What he discovered next would change everything. Ruth finds unexpected connection with a wounded child. But what secrets does that abandoned warehouse hold? And what happened inside those walls 5 years ago? Denise Archer had worked for Child Protective Services for 15 years. In that time, she had seen cases that would haunt most people for the rest of their lives. She had learned to build walls around her heart, to maintain professional distance, to go home at the end of each day, and somehow find peace. But the file on her desk this morning made those walls feel paper thin. At 45 years old, Denise had developed a reputation for being relentless. Other social workers gave up when cases became too complicated, when the paperwork multiplied and the leads went cold. Denise never stopped. She could not. Every child who slipped through the system felt like a personal failure, a weight she carried on shoulders that grew heavier each year. She arrived at Detroit General Hospital just after 9 in the morning, her leather bag stuffed with forms and her mind already racing through possibilities. The police report from Officer Caldwell had been brief but disturbing. A child found alone. No identification, no records. Signs of severe long-term neglect. Dr. Webb met her in the hallway outside Emily's room. He looked exhausted, as if he had not slept much the night before. "The tumor is significant," he explained quietly. "It has been growing for years without any medical attention. We are scheduling more tests to determine the exact nature and whether surgery is viable." Denise absorbed this information with practiced calm. And her mental state? Fragile but responsive. She has bonded with one of our volunteers, Ruth Holloway. That connection seems to be helping. Denise nodded and approached the room carefully. Through the glass window in the door, she could see a small figure in the hospital bed, a silver-haired woman sitting beside her. They were looking at a book together, the child pointing at pictures with cautious curiosity. When Denise entered, Emily's entire demeanor changed. Her body tensed, her eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape routes. Her hands gripped the blanket defensively. Denise had seen this reaction countless times. Children who had been hurt learned to recognize authority figures as threats rather than protectors. "Hello, Emily," Denise said softly, keeping her distance. "My name is Denise. I work with families and children. I am here to help figure out how to keep you safe." Emily did not respond. Her gaze moved to Ruth, seeking reassurance. Ruth placed a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "It is okay, sweetheart. Denise is one of the good ones. She wants to help." The endorsement seemed to relax Emily slightly, though suspicion still clouded her young features. Denise sat down slowly, making herself smaller and less threatening. She did not take out her notebook or pen, knowing that such objects often frighten children who associated paperwork with bad outcomes. "I know you have been through a lot," Denise said carefully, "and I know talking to strangers is scary. But anything you can tell me about where you lived or who took care of you, could help us understand what happened. Emily remained silent for a long moment. Then she looked down at her hands and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. There was a room. It was dark most of the time, the door locked from outside. Denise felt her professional composure strain against the weight of those simple words. Do you remember where this room was? What the building looked like? Emily shook her head slowly. I did not go outside, not for a long time. Ruth retrieved a piece of paper and some crayons from her bag. Could you draw it, sweetheart? Sometimes pictures are easier than words. Emily took the crayons hesitantly. For several minutes, she worked in concentrated silence, while Denise and Ruth exchanged worried glances over her head. The finished drawing was crude but devastating. A small rectangle represented a room, no windows, a single door with a large lock. A tiny figure sat in the corner, drawn in gray crayon, nearly invisible against the white paper. That is me, Emily explained unnecessarily. Waiting. Denise took a photograph of the drawing with her phone, her hands trembling slightly despite her best efforts at control. Back at her office that afternoon, Denise began the exhaustive process of searching for any trace of Emily's existence. Birth, records, hospital admissions, school enrollment, social services contacts, foster care placements. Nothing. The child simply did not exist in any official capacity. Then Denise tried a different approach. She searched for women named Crystal Wren who had given birth approximately 8 years ago. Anywhere in Michigan. One result appeared. Crystal Ann Wren had given birth at a small county hospital in rural Michigan 8 years and 4 months ago. The birth certificate listed a baby girl, but the document also contained a notation that stopped Denise cold. The infant was recorded as stillborn. No father listed, no witnesses to the birth except the attending physician who had since retired and moved out of state. But if that baby died at birth, who was the little girl lying in a hospital bed in Detroit? Denise stared at her computer screen for a long time, feeling the familiar weight of a case that was about to become far more complicated than anyone anticipated. Someone had declared Emily dead before she ever had a chance to live. And now Denise needed to find out why. A birth certificate for a dead baby. A child who officially does not exist. And a web of secrets that stretches back 8 years. What happened the day Emily was born? And who wanted her to disappear? 3 days had passed since Officer Marcus Caldwell found Emily in that cold alley. 3 days of tests, examinations, and waiting. 3 days during which Ruth Holloway had barely left the hospital, sleeping in the chair beside Emily's bed and eating cafeteria food that tasted like cardboard. Dr. Nathan Webb requested a meeting in his office on the 4th morning. The tone of his voice when he called Ruth left no doubt that the news would be serious. Marcus arrived first, still in uniform, from his night shift. He had been checking in on Emily every day, unable to shake the feeling that finding her had been more than coincidence. Denise came straight from her office, carrying a folder thick with documents and dead ends. Ruth was the last to enter, her face pale from sleepless nights. She had aged visibly in the past few days, the lines around her eyes deeper, her movements slower. But her determination remained undiminished. Dr. Webb closed the door and gestured for everyone to sit. His desk was cluttered with medical files and imaging results. On his computer screen, a scan showed the shadowy outline of Emily's abdomen. I want to begin by saying there is hope, Dr. Webb started, a phrase that doctors often used when the news was particularly difficult. The tests have confirmed what we suspected. Emily has a tumor in her abdomen. It is large, roughly the size of a grapefruit, which explains her appearance when she was found. Ruth closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself against the words. The tumor appears to be a type called a Wilms tumor, Dr. Webb continued. It typically occurs in children, and when caught early, treatment is usually very successful. He paused, his expression growing heavier. The problem is that Emily's tumor was not caught early. Based on our analysis, it has been growing for at least 3 to 4 years without any medical intervention. Marcus leaned forward. 3 to 4 years? How is that possible? Would she not have shown symptoms? She would have, Dr. Webb confirmed. Pain, fatigue, loss of appetite, visible swelling, all signs that any responsible caregiver would have noticed and addressed. The fact that she received no treatment means one of two things. Either no one was paying attention to her, or someone deliberately ignored her suffering. The room fell silent as the implications settled over everyone. Denise spoke first. What are her options now? Is surgery possible? Dr. Webb nodded slowly. Surgery is not only possible, it is necessary. We need to remove the tumor as soon as Emily is strong, enough to withstand the procedure. She is severely malnourished, and her immune system is compromised from years of neglect. We are working to build up her strength first. And if the surgery is successful? Ruth asked, her voice barely steady. Then her prognosis is actually quite good. Children are remarkably resilient. With proper treatment and care, Emily could live a completely normal life. Dr. Webb allowed a small smile to cross his features. She is a fighter, that much is clear. Despite everything she has endured, her spirit is intact. Ruth felt tears threatening to fall and forced them back. There would be time for crying later. Right now, Emily needed her to be strong. After the meeting, Ruth returned to Emily's room to find the girl sitting up in bed, looking out the window at the gray October sky. Leaves swirled in the wind outside, dancing in patterns that seemed to fascinate her completely. "Ruth," Emily said without turning around, "what are those?" Ruth moved to stand beside her, following her gaze. "Those are leaves, sweetheart. They fall from the trees every autumn." "Autumn," Emily repeated, testing the word. "What is autumn?" The question struck Ruth with unexpected force. This child had never experienced the simple pleasure of watching seasons change. She had been locked away, hidden from the world, denied even the most basic joys of childhood. "Autumn is when the world gets ready to rest," Ruth explained gently. "The leaves change colors and fall down, and everything becomes quiet for a while. Then spring comes and everything wakes up again." Emily considered this information carefully. "When can I go outside? I want to see the leaves fall. I never saw them before." Ruth placed her hand over Emily's small fingers on the windowsill. "Soon, sweetheart. The doctors need to help you get stronger first, but I promise you, you will see the leaves fall. And next spring you will see flowers bloom. And next summer you will feel warm sunshine on your face." Emily turned to look at her, those old soul eyes searching Ruth's face for truth. "You promise." "I promise," Ruth said firmly, making a vow she intended to keep no matter what it cost her. Later that evening, as Ruth dozed in her chair, a nurse stopped by the room to check Emily's vitals. She mentioned casually that the hospital had received an unusual phone call that afternoon. "Someone asking about the little girl who was found," the nurse explained, would not give a name. The voice sounded older, maybe elderly. She was crying, asking if the child was okay. Ruth sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "Did she leave any contact information?" The nurse shook her head. She hung up before anyone could ask. It was strange, like she wanted to know but was afraid to be involved. After the nurse left, Ruth sat in the darkness thinking about that mysterious caller. Someone out there knew about Emily. Someone cared enough to call but was too frightened to identify themselves. The question was whether that person was friend or foe, a tumor that grew for years in silence, a surgery that offers hope, and a mysterious phone call from someone too afraid to speak their name. Who is watching Emily from the shadows? And what are they so afraid of? Denise. Archer had not slept properly in 5 days. The case of Emily Wren had consumed her completely, filling her waking hours with research and her dreams with unanswered questions. Her small office at Child Protective Services was buried under stacks of files, printouts, and handwritten notes that formed a maze of information leading nowhere. But today, she finally had a thread to pull. The birth certificate she had discovered listed Crystal Ann Wren as Emily's mother, a woman who had declared her baby stillborn 8 years ago in a rural county hospital, a woman who had then vanished from all official records. Denise spent the morning making phone calls, navigating the frustrating bureaucracy of government agencies that rarely communicated with each other. She requested records from social services departments, housing authorities, and welfare offices across 3 counties. By noon, a picture began to emerge. A troubling, heartbreaking picture. Crystal Wren had first appeared in the social services system 12 years ago. She was 19 then, struggling with substance dependency and living in unstable housing. Caseworkers had flagged her situation multiple times, recommending intervention and support services. But the system was overwhelmed, understaffed, and underfunded. Crystal fell through the cracks. 7 years ago, an anonymous complaint was filed about a residence in northeast Detroit. A neighbor reported hearing a child crying at unusual hours and seeing a young woman who appeared unwell coming and going at strange times. A social worker was assigned to investigate. Denise found the report buried in archived files. The caseworker had visited the address once, knocked on the door, and spoken briefly with Crystal through a partially opened door. Crystal claimed the child was her niece visiting temporarily. The caseworker noted the apartment appeared cluttered, but saw no immediate signs of danger. Case closed, no follow-up scheduled. Denise stared at the report, feeling anger build in her chest. One visit, one brief conversation, through a cracked door. That was all that stood between Emily and help, and the system had failed her completely. She drove to the address listed in the report, a rundown apartment building in a neighborhood that time had forgotten. Most units appeared vacant, windows boarded up or broken. But an elderly woman sat on the front steps watching the street with tired eyes. "Excuse me," Denise said, approaching carefully. "I am looking for information about someone who used to live here. A woman named Crystal Wren." The elderly woman studied Denise for a long moment, taking in her professional appearance and the official badge clipped to her jacket. "You with the government?" "Child Protective Services. I am trying to help a little girl who may have lived here." Something shifted in the woman's expression, a shadow of guilt perhaps, or the weight of secrets kept too long. "Crystal, the woman repeated slowly. "Troubled girl. Lived in 4B for a while, maybe 6 or 7 years back. Had problems, anyone could see that. Drugs, I think. She kept to herself mostly. Did you ever see a child with her?" The woman hesitated, her gaze dropping to her worn shoes. "Sometimes I heard crying. Late at night mostly. Crystal said it was the television, that she liked to watch sad movies. I did not push." She looked up again, her eyes glistening. "I should have pushed, shouldn't I? I should have asked more questions." Denise felt the familiar weight of collective failure settling over the conversation. "Did anyone else report concerns?" "Mrs. Patterson down the hall called someone once. Social services or police, I am not sure. Someone came by, asked a few questions, then left. Nothing changed. After that, we all just—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "We minded our own business. That is what you do around here. You mind your own business and hope trouble does not find you." Back in her car, Denise sat in silence for several minutes, processing what she had learned. An entire neighborhood had sensed something wrong but chosen to look away. A system designed to protect children had accepted the flimsiest excuses and moved on to the next case. Emily had been invisible because everyone had decided not to see her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. He had been digging into Crystal Wren's final years and had discovered something significant. Denise drove to meet him at a coffee shop near the police station. Marcus looked as exhausted as she felt, dark circles under his eyes and coffee stains on his uniform shirt. "Crystal Wren died 6 months ago," he said without preamble. "Overdose. Her body was found in an abandoned building on the east side. Case was closed as accidental. No investigation into her personal life or possible dependents." Denise felt the information hit her like a physical blow. 6 months. Emily was alone for 6 months before I found her. Marcus nodded grimly. Near as I can tell, Crystal had been declining for years. Neighbors in her last known residence said she became increasingly erratic, disappearing for days at a time. If Emily was with her during that period, he did not need to finish the sentence. They both understood what those months must have been like for a 7-year-old child, watching her mother deteriorate, being left alone for longer and longer periods until finally the door did not open at all anymore. How did she end up in that alley? Denise asked quietly. Still working on that. But I think someone moved her there. Someone who knew about her and decided to leave her where she might be found. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Who had known about Emily, and why had they waited so long to act? A system that failed at every turn. A mother who disappeared into addiction. And 6 months of silence before anyone found Emily. But someone knew she existed. Someone placed her in that alley. The question is, who? Marcus Caldwell spent his day off doing something he had not done in 30 years of police work. He walked the streets of his patrol district on foot, without his uniform, without his badge, seeing the neighborhood through different eyes. He knocked on doors. He spoke with shop owners. He sat on benches beside elderly residents who had lived in these blocks for decades. And he asked the same question over and over again. Did you ever notice a little girl who seemed invisible? The answers he received haunted him more than any crime scene ever had. I saw her once, maybe twice. Thought she belonged to someone. Kids around here come and go. You stop paying attention after a while. I figured someone else would say something if there was a problem. It was not my business. You learn not to get involved. Marcus listened to excuse after excuse, watching people avoid his eyes as they spoke. These were not bad people. They were ordinary citizens, neighbors, community members. And yet collectively, they had allowed a child to suffer in plain sight. But could he really judge them? How many times had he driven past situations that seemed slightly off and kept going? How many calls had he answered with minimum effort because his shift was ending? How many children had he failed to see? The weight of that realization pressed down on his chest as he walked back to his car. That evening, he visited Emily at the hospital. She was sitting up in bed, practicing letters with Ruth. Her handwriting was shaky and uncertain, but her concentration was fierce. Officer Marcus, Emily said when she saw him. It was the first time she had used his name without prompting. Hey there, little Wren, he replied, settling into a chair. What? Are you learning today? Emily held up her paper proudly. The word hope was written across it in large, uneven letters. Ruth taught me, Emily explained. She says hope is believing good things can happen even when everything seems dark. Marcus glanced at Ruth, who smiled tiredly from her chair. She looked paler than yesterday, he noticed, more fragile somehow, but her eyes still held that fierce determination he had come to admire. After Emily fell asleep, Marcus walked with Ruth to the cafeteria for coffee. She moved slowly, pausing once to steady herself against the wall. Are you feeling all right? He asked carefully. Ruth waved away his concern. Just tired, these old bones are not built for sleeping in hospital chairs. But Marcus was a detective by nature. He noticed the way she pressed her hand briefly against her chest, the slight shortness of breath she tried to hide. The envelope she kept tucked in her purse, one corner visible, bearing the hospital's medical letterhead. He did not push. Everyone had the right to their own secrets, but he made a mental note to watch her more closely. I have been thinking, Ruth said as they sat with their coffees, about how Emily ended up alone in that alley. Someone put her there, someone who knew about her. Marcus nodded. I have been thinking the same thing. Whoever it was, they chose a spot where she would likely be found. Morning patrol route near a busy street. It was almost like they wanted her to be discovered. But why wait until Crystal was gone? Why not help her sooner? The question hung between them, unanswerable for now. Ruth stared into her coffee cup, her thoughts clearly far away. I had a daughter once, she said quietly. Her name was Crystal, too. Strange coincidence, is it not? Marcus waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. I lost her to addiction, not to death, but to that fog that swallows people whole. She disappeared 12 years ago. I never found out what happened to her. Ruth looked up, her eyes glistening. I could not save my own child. Maybe that is why I feel so strongly about saving Emily. Like the universe is giving me a second chance. Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Whatever the reason, that little girl is lucky you found her. Ruth smiled sadly. We found each other. A community that chose not to see. A detective haunted by his own failures, and Ruth carrying secrets of her own while fighting for a child who needs her. But time may be running out for more than one person in this story. 2 weeks had passed since Emily arrived at Detroit General Hospital. 2 weeks of tests, treatments, and slow recovery. 2 weeks during which a frightened, silent child had begun to transform into something resembling a normal little girl. Ruth arrived that morning carrying a special gift. It was a book she had ordered online, a beautiful illustrated guide dedicated entirely to wrens. Every species, every habitat, every song pattern cataloged in vivid detail. Emily's eyes widened when she saw it. This whole book is about birds like me? Every single page, Ruth confirmed, settling into her usual chair. Did you know there are over 80 different species of wrens in the world? And they live on almost every continent. Emily opened the book reverently, treating it like a precious treasure. She traced the illustrations with her fingertip, mouthing the names of each bird silently. This one is my favorite, she announced after several minutes of careful study. She pointed to a small brown bird with a curved beak. The Carolina wren. It says here they sing even in winter when other birds are quiet. Ruth smiled. That sounds like someone I know. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Emily laughed. It was a small sound, hesitant and unpracticed, like a muscle that had not been used in years. But it was genuine. The medical team had noticed improvements as well. Emily was gaining weight steadily. Her color had improved. The haunted look in her eyes appeared less frequently now, replaced by moments of genuine curiosity and even joy. Dr. Webb declared her strong. Enough for surgery within the next 2 weeks. The tumor would be removed, and Emily would have a real chance at a healthy life. That afternoon, Denise arrived with unexpected news. She had filed paperwork requesting that Emily remain under temporary state custody rather than being transferred to a group facility. The request had been approved. What does that mean? Emily asked, looking between the adults with careful attention. It means you get to stay here until you are better, Denise explained gently. And it means we have time to figure out the best place for you to live after that. Somewhere safe. Somewhere permanent. Emily considered this information quietly. Then she asked a question that made everyone's heart ache. Will Ruth be there? Before anyone could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He was off duty, dressed in civilian clothes and carrying a small gift bag. Knock, knock, he said, smiling at the gathered group. I heard there was a brave young lady here who might like a visitor. Emily sat up straighter, a shy smile crossing her face. Over the past 2 weeks, she had grown comfortable with Marcus. He never pushed her to talk. He never asked difficult questions. He simply showed up, sat with her, and treated her like she mattered. I brought you something, Marcus said, handing her the gift bag. Emily reached inside and pulled out a small stuffed bird. It was soft brown with a round body and bright black eyes. A perfect little wren. The lady at the store said it was the last one, Marcus explained, looking slightly embarrassed. Thought you might like some company at night. Emily clutched the stuffed animal against her chest, her eyes shining with emotion she did not have words to express. Thank you, she whispered. I will call her Hope. Ruth reached over and squeezed Emily's hand. That is a perfect name. For a moment, the hospital room felt less like a medical facility and more like a home. 4 people brought together by tragedy had formed an unlikely family, bound not by blood but by something equally powerful. Then, Denise's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted to something Ruth could not quite read. "Excuse me," Denise said quietly, stepping into the hallway. When she returned 5 minutes later, her face was carefully neutral in that way professionals learn when they have significant news to deliver. "That was my office," she said slowly. "A woman called from Ohio. She saw the news coverage about Emily." Denise paused, choosing her next words carefully. "She claims to be Emily's grandmother. A stuffed bird named Hope, a child learning to laugh again. And now a grandmother emerges from the shadows. Is she the answer to Emily's prayers? Or will her arrival complicate everything?" Lorraine Wren sat in her small kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, staring at the telephone she had just hung up. Her hands trembled so badly she had to set down her coffee cup to avoid spilling it. For 12 years, she had lived with a hole in her heart where her daughter used to be. Crystal had been her only child, born when Lorraine was already in her 30s and had given up hope of becoming a mother. She had loved that girl with everything she had, and it had not been enough. The teenage years brought changes Lorraine still did not fully understand. Crystal became angry, secretive, drawn to people and substances that promised escape from something Lorraine could never identify. By 19, Crystal was gone, a note on the kitchen table, a few possessions missing, and silence that stretched into years. Lorraine had searched. She had filed missing persons reports. She had contacted shelters and hospitals and morgues, always fearing the worst, always hoping for a miracle. Eventually, the searching became occasional rather than constant. Life continued, even when joy did not. Then 3 days ago, Lorraine had been watching the evening news when a story from Detroit caught her attention. A little girl found abandoned. No records, no identity. The reporter mentioned that the child had been wearing a bracelet with a name, Emily, and that investigators were searching for anyone with information about a woman named Crystal Wren. Lorraine had dropped her remote control. She had stared at the screen with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might stop entirely. Crystal. Her Crystal. And a child. A granddaughter she never knew existed. It had taken 3 days for Lorraine to gather the courage to call. 3 days of crying and praying and staring at old photographs of Crystal as a little girl. 3 days of wondering if this was real or some cruel mistake. Now she waited for a social worker named Denise to return her call with more information. The phone rang 20 minutes later. "Mrs. Wren, this is Denise Archer from Child Protective Services in Detroit. Thank you for contacting us." Lorraine gripped the phone tightly. "Please tell me it is true. Is that little girl my granddaughter? Is Crystal really her mother?" Denise explained the situation carefully. Yes, records indicated that Crystal Wren had given birth 8 years ago. Yes, the child appeared to match the timeline. But there were complications. The birth had been registered as stillborn. There were no official records of Emily's existence. "I need to see her," Lorraine said, her voice breaking. "Please, I have lost so much already. If there is any chance that child is my family, I need to know." Denise promised to arrange a DNA test. If Lorraine was willing to travel to Detroit, they could begin the verification process immediately. "I will leave tomorrow," Lorraine said without hesitation. "I will drive through the night if I have to." After hanging up, Lorraine went to her bedroom closet and pulled out a small box she had not opened in years. Inside were photographs, letters, and mementos from Crystal's childhood. A tiny hospital bracelet. From the day Crystal was born. A Mother's Day card made with construction paper and glitter. A photograph of Crystal at 8 years old, smiling at the camera with bright eyes full of innocence. Lorraine held that photograph and studied it closely. Then she thought about the news footage she had seen. The glimpse of a small face being carried into a hospital. The eyes were the same. She was certain of it. "I am coming, sweetheart," Lorraine whispered to the photograph. "Grandma is coming." Meanwhile, in Detroit, Ruth sat alone in the hospital chapel. She had left Emily sleeping peacefully. Hope the stuffed wren tucked under her arm. Ruth needed a moment to process the news about Emily's grandmother. She should be happy. This was what they had hoped for, a real family member, someone with a legal claim to care for Emily. But deep inside, Ruth felt something she was ashamed to admit. Fear, jealousy, the terror of losing another child she had grown to love. She reached into her purse and touched the medical envelope she had been carrying for days. Her own secret, her own ticking clock. "Please," she whispered to whoever might be listening. "Just give me enough time to see her." Safe. A grandmother desperate to reclaim lost family. A volunteer fighting her own hidden battle. And a little girl caught between two women who love her. But can there be room in Emily's life for both? The DNA results arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Denise read the report 3 times before, picking up the phone to share the news. Lorraine Wren was Emily's biological grandmother. The match was conclusive. Lorraine had arrived in Detroit 2 days earlier, checking into a modest hotel near the hospital. She had spent those days pacing her room, praying, and staring at the photograph of 8-year-old Crystal she had brought from home. When Denise called with the confirmation, Lorraine wept openly. "Thank you," she repeated between sobs. "Thank you for finding her." The first meeting was arranged carefully. Hospital protocol required a supervised introduction, with Emily's emotional well-being as the priority. A child psychologist would be present. Ruth would remain nearby for support. Lorraine arrived wearing her best dress, a navy blue outfit she usually reserved for church. She had spent an hour on her hair and makeup, wanting to look presentable, wanting to make a good impression on a granddaughter who did not know she existed. The meeting took place in a small family room adjacent to Emily's ward. A glass window separated the spaces, allowing visual contact before any direct interaction. Lorraine saw Emily first. The little girl sat at a table drawing pictures with colored pencils. Ruth sat beside her, offering quiet encouragement. "Oh, my Lord," Lorraine breathed, pressing her hand against the glass. "She looks just like Crystal. Those eyes, that chin. It is like seeing my daughter again." Emily noticed the movement and looked up. She studied the elderly woman on the other side of the glass with cautious curiosity. No fear, but no recognition either. Ruth leaned down and spoke softly. "Emily, that woman would like to meet you. She might be your grandmother, your mother's mother." Emily considered this information carefully. "I had a grandmother. Everyone has grandparents, sweetheart. Sometimes we just do not get to meet them right away." The door opened and Lorraine stepped into the room slowly, not wanting to overwhelm the child. She stopped several feet away, tears streaming down her cheeks despite her efforts to remain composed. "Hello, Emily," she said, her voice trembling. "My name is Lorraine. I think I might be your grandma." Emily studied her for a long moment. "You are crying. Are you sad?" Lorraine laughed softly through her tears. "No, sweetheart. These are happy tears. I have been looking for you for a very long time, even though I did not know you existed." The conversation continued carefully, mediated by the psychologist who ensured Emily never felt pressured. Lorraine asked gentle questions about Emily's favorite colors and foods. Emily showed her grandmother the drawings she had made. Small steps toward connection, but Ruth noticed something shifting in the room. A subtle change in dynamics. Lorraine spoke about the future with increasing confidence. Her house in Ohio, the bedroom she would prepare, the school district in her neighborhood. "I appreciate everything you have done," Lorraine said to Ruth later when Emily was distracted with her drawings. "But she is my family now, my responsibility." The words were not unkind, but they carried a firmness that felt like a door closing. Ruth nodded politely, but inside she felt her heart fracture. She had known this moment would come. She had no legal claim to Emily, no biological connection. She was just a volunteer who had been in the right place at the right time. That evening, After Lorraine returned to her hotel, Emily asked Ruth a question that cut straight to the bone. "If that lady takes me to Ohio, will you come?" "To?" Ruth struggled to find words. "Sweetheart, Lorraine is your family. Your real family. She loves you very much." "But I love you," Emily said simply. "You stayed when nobody else did." Ruth pulled the little girl into a gentle hug, hiding the tears that spilled down her own cheeks. "Some people stay in our hearts even when they cannot stay in our homes," Ruth whispered. "And I will always, always be in yours." Blood confirms what the heart already knew. But as Lorraine prepares to claim her granddaughter, Ruth faces an impossible goodbye. And a new complication is about to emerge that could threaten everything. The complication arrived 3 days before Emily's scheduled surgery. A man named Dean Forster had contacted a lawyer claiming to be Emily's biological father. Denise received the news with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had seen this pattern before. Absent parents, who suddenly appeared when media attention or potential compensation entered the picture. Dean Forster was 41 years old, living in a trailer park outside Flint. He worked as a mechanic when he worked at all. His record showed unpaid debts and a history of disappearing when responsibilities became inconvenient. Marcus drove to Flint to interview him personally. Dean answered the door in a stained undershirt, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Yeah, I knew Crystal," Dean admitted when pressed. "We were together for a while, maybe 9 years back. She was already messed up when I met her. I got out before things got worse." "Did you know she had a child?" Marcus asked. Dean shrugged. "Heard rumors. Never confirmed anything. Was not really my business by then. And now you want to claim parental rights?" Dean's eyes shifted, calculating. "Look, I saw the news. People are talking about this case. Donations coming in for the kid. Maybe some kind of victim compensation fund." He leaned against his door frame with practiced casualness. "If she is mine, seems like I should be involved. That is just fair, right?" Marcus felt disgust rise in his throat, but kept his expression neutral. "You abandoned a woman you knew was struggling. You never once checked if there was a child, and now you want to claim her because there might be money involved?" Dean's face hardened. "I got rights. The law says so." Back in Detroit, the news spread quickly. Lorraine was devastated. Ruth was furious. Emily, thankfully, remained unaware of the threat gathering around her future. Denise worked overtime researching Dean's background, building a case that would demonstrate his unfitness. But the legal system moved slowly, and Dean had just enough standing to complicate the custody proceedings. For the first time since finding Emily, Ruth and Lorraine found themselves united completely. They sat together in the hospital cafeteria, two women from different worlds, bound by love for the same child. "He does not want her," Lorraine said quietly. "He wants whatever he thinks he can get from her situation." Ruth nodded. "Then we do not let him." An unlikely alliance was formed that afternoon. Whatever differences existed between them could wait. Emily's future came first. A father who never cared now threatens everything. Two women must unite against a common enemy. But will the law protect Emily or fail her once again? The family courtroom in Detroit was smaller than most people imagined. No grand wooden benches or dramatic lighting. Just fluorescent bulbs, plastic chairs, and a judge's desk cluttered with case files. Emily was not present. The psychologist had recommended she remain at the hospital, protected from the stress of legal proceedings. Ruth stayed with her while Marcus, Denise, and Lorraine faced Dean Forster across the aisle. Dean had arrived in a wrinkled dress shirt, his lawyer a tired-looking man who charged by the hour and clearly wanted. This finished quickly. Judge Patricia Hammond presided. A veteran of family court, she had seen every type of custody dispute imaginable. Her expression remained unreadable as both sides presented their arguments. Lorraine testified first. Her voice broke several times as she described losing Crystal, discovering Emily's existence, and the overwhelming desire to give her granddaughter the life her daughter never had. "I was not a perfect mother," Lorraine admitted. But I loved Crystal with everything I had, and I already love Emily the same way. Please give me the chance to prove it. Denise presented evidence of Dean's absence. 8 years without a single attempt to locate or contact the child. No financial support. No involvement whatsoever until media coverage made the case public. Then it was Dean's turn. His lawyer made standard arguments about parental rights, biological connection, and second chances. Judge Hammond listened patiently. Then she addressed Dean directly. "Mr. Forster, in 8 years, did you ever attempt to locate this child?" Dean shifted uncomfortably. "I did not know for certain she existed. But you suspected. You heard rumors. And you did." "Nothing." The judge's voice remained calm but carried unmistakable weight. "Why come forward now?" Dean glanced at his lawyer, then back at the judge. His mask of concern slipped just slightly. "Look, if there is compensation involved in this situation, should it not go to the real father? I am just being practical here." The courtroom fell silent. Even Dean's lawyer closed his eyes in resignation. Judge Hammond made her ruling within the hour. Dean Forster's claim was dismissed. His absence, his motivations, and his complete lack of interest in Emily's welfare disqualified him from any custody. Consideration. Lorraine collapsed into tears of relief. Marcus exhaled a breath he had been holding for days. The path to Emily's future was finally clear. Justice prevails, and a greedy man is turned away. But Emily still faces her greatest challenge, the surgery that will determine whether she lives to see the life waiting for her. The night before Emily's surgery, the hospital room felt sacred somehow. Ruth sat beside the bed, reading softly from the book about wrens. Lorraine occupied a chair near the window, watching the two of them with quiet acceptance. Somewhere along the way, the tension between the women had dissolved. They had become partners in loving this child, rather than rivals for her affection. Emily listened to the story about birds that migrated thousands of miles to find home. When Ruth finished, the little girl looked up with serious eyes. "Will you be here when I wake up?" Ruth felt her heart clench. Her own health was failing, though she had told no one except Marcus. But she looked into Emily's trusting face and made a promise she intended to keep. "I will be right here, sweetheart. I promise." Marcus arrived at dawn with coffee and donuts. Lorraine managed a tired laugh. Even Emily smiled at the unexpected breakfast gathering. When the nurses came to prepare Emily for surgery, she reached under her blanket and pulled out Hope, the small stuffed wren Marcus had given her. "Take care of her for me," Emily said, pressing the bird into Ruth's hands. "Until I come back." Ruth clutched the soft toy against her chest. "I will keep her safe." Emily disappeared through the surgical doors. Ruth watched until they closed completely, then felt a sharp pain radiate through her chest. She leaned against Marcus, breathing carefully. "I am fine," she whispered, "just worried." But Marcus saw the truth in her eyes. Time was running out for more than one person in this story. A child faces her greatest battle. A woman hides her fading strength, and everything depends on what happens next. 4 hours felt like 4 years. Lorraine paced the waiting room, her lips moving in silent prayer. Denise worked on custody paperwork, determined to have everything ready the moment Emily woke. Marcus sat beside Ruth, watching her with growing concern. Ruth's face had grown pale. Her breathing came in shallow waves, but she refused to leave. Refused to seek medical attention, refused to break her promise to Emily. "She needs to know I was here," Ruth whispered when Marcus urged her to rest. "That is all that matters now." The surgical doors finally opened. Dr. Webb emerged, exhaustion written across his features, but something else shining in his eyes. "The surgery was successful," he announced. "We removed the tumor completely. Emily's going to be okay." Lorraine collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Denise closed her laptop and allowed herself a rare smile. Marcus gripped Ruth's hand tightly. Ruth felt tears streaming down her face. Joy and grief mingled together in ways she could not separate. Emily would live. Emily would have a future. That evening, while Emily slept peacefully in recovery, Ruth asked Marcus for a favor. "I need to write something," she said quietly. "A letter for Emily, for when I cannot be here anymore. Will you help me?" Marcus understood what she was asking. He nodded slowly, his own eyes glistening. "Whatever you need, Ruth. Whatever you need." They sat together through the night, crafting words that would